Okay, so hello everyone, and I'm glad you're joining me here today. It is the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday here in the United States, which is a huge shopping day. So I, questioned whether or not I was even going to do a video today, but we're going to do it. Today is Friday, November 29th, and this is the way to be. People have posted questions during the week, and we're going to address those questions today in this video. If you have questions yourself, first of all, about what we're going to cover in this video, please look down in the video description and I'll give you the line item by line item topics that we're going to cover today. If you have questions of your own that come across your mind that you think are basic in nature for beekeeping in your backyard and you'd like to have that addressed, we might talk about it next Friday. So write those in the comment section below this video and we'll see if we can't get to those too. So we'll get right into this. Number one is Laura M. Tearing splits. What is your opinion on this method, forcing them to swarm mode, and it seems to have chilled them both out? Okay, now normally I would consider splits of any kind to be kind of an advanced behavior for a beginning beekeeper. The tearing off split method is one that I felt like I would talk about this, even though this is beginner beekeeping, because it gives me an opportunity to discuss some of my principles when it comes to getting into your beehives. Now, there are a lot of ways to split bees to create a second hive of bees. So if you've got a really strong colony, you want to split it. There are a lot of methods for doing that. I've given demonstrations and videos on how to do that. And I like to be as least invasive in a beehive as possible. Honeybees suffer stress every time we get into the hive. So the goal is to get in there and be as least disruptive to the bees as you can and damage as little of their infrastructure as you can. So now this is, going to be an issue because some beekeepers use this method and they like it, and other beekeepers will have differing opinions, and I'm one of those. I would not personally use the method. So what's wrong with it? What is this method? Well, if you're doing a tearing off split, you're actually taking apart the entire beehive and shaking every single bee out of the hive. And then you're going to reassemble the boxes and you're going to wait for those bees to follow the queen. Those that follow the queen, it becomes your swarm. And those that don't follow the queen are driven back into the original hive equipment and you keep them that way. I'm just going to tell you, this is nothing against the people that are using that. I wouldn't do the method, because it involves exposing every single bee from the hive. Most bees have never been out of the hive. The largest population of your beehive is going to be nurse bees and interior workers. The foraging bees are the later stage of life, and those are the ones who know where they live and where they are. And normally when you have a swarm coming, you can do your own split in a very controlled way though. You can just bring a new box, park it next to the old box, and you can pull frames of brood, open brood, capped brood, and you can take resources out and swap them with empty frames and share them evenly between both boxes. This does not involve dismantling the entire thing and dumping it out on a big sheet or something like that. So I think that method is the most disruptive method that you could possibly do to get into a beehive, and you're going to stress the colony, no matter how you slice it. Dumping all of your bees out on the ground, letting them all go airborne and waiting for them to congregate in two different areas is a huge mess, in my opinion. And I will put a link down in the video description that shows how I do splits, and I do it in a very quiet and controlled way. The bees are calm, they don't feel completely invaded. Anytime you're going to go into a beehive and start pulling out brood frames, you're in their most critical area. That is the most stressful and disruptive to the bees. So it's my opinion that we owe it to the bees to get in there as quietly and carefully as we can to do our procedures. And if there are queen cells being developed, then we're heading those off by creating a split. So we're going to take the queen and we're going to put her in the new box, and then we're going to let these queen cells hatch out. Now, usually they make a bunch of them. So if you've got a couple different brood frames that have those queen swarm cells on them, put some extra swarm cells in the new box and keep some swarm cells in the old box. That way we have complete insurance that wherever the queen actually ended up going, we're going to know that those colonies are going to produce a replacement queen And if they don't, that's the other purpose for open brood. So if they fail, they can make new queens, which takes a little longer, but they'll have open brood to do it. So I personally do not like that method at all. In fact, with some colonies, some of my colonies, like if you did that to my super colony, you would have a huge defensive response initially, and you're going to smash a lot of bees. I mean, I don't see any way around it. If we're pulling every box, every frame, and we're dumping everything out, you're ultimately going to cause injury to some of those bees. Plus, think of the brood that's open that's being attended to by those nurse bees. You've dumped them all out. You've exposed your brood too while you reassemble your boxes and your frames and get everything in order for you to complete this artificial swarm creation method. So it's not one that I personally do because I think it is, as far as splits go, the most invasive method of splitting bees that you could possibly do. And I can do the whole thing very quietly in 10 or 15 minutes from start to finish. So I really don't personally like the idea of exposing everything, dumping everything out. And it is proven that when bees are stressed from beekeepers that are helicopter beekeepers or whatever you want to call them, that get into their colonies frequently, that start to manipulate things too much, to do a lot of damage to the infrastructure. I wouldn't be able to pull boxes apart, for example, without having honey going everywhere because the connective tissue from the frames, we're taking that apart and everything else. So there are other risks from robbing, for example, and we create a weak state for those bees while they reorganize and reassemble themselves. And we've dumped bees outside it's way premature for them. Nurse bees do not have the physical ability to hold their own defensively. So they're kind of soft-bodied bees when they're young. And they have definite jobs, and those jobs don't include having them dumped outside and then recollected and then reinstalled in a hive. So just for me personally, that's something I don't like because it's so disruptive. Next, number 2 is from Thin Less. If you were starting in spring and couldn't afford a flow hive, what setup would you use? Okay, the most basic, and right now, by the way, today's Black Friday, so this is a good time actually to go shopping for bee equipment if you're thinking about starting next spring. The least expensive, the most proven method is going to be Langstroth hives. So they sell them, I recommend Better Bee or Dadant, or you can go to Mann Lake. But here's the most basic setup. You're going to have a hive stand. Some people put them on cinder blocks. Some people build a hive stand. I put mine on iron T-posts, and then I use electrical 1.5-inch conduit to set them up on. But the most basic setup is solid bottom board, an entrance reducer. You buy a whole kit for under $400. And you decide whether you want an 8 or a 10 frame size. So now this is a miniature just for training. So this is a mock-up. And then you'll have a brood box and you'll have frames. And you can get, we've talked about all the different types of frames before too, but a 10 or an 8 frame box. This is the most basic you can have. It's going to be deep. I like deeps. There are some people, there's a movement where every box they're using is a medium. Personally, all of my brood boxes are deep boxes, and I've had colonies get through winter just like this with only this box. The next thing that would go on that is an inner cover. This inner cover is a barrier that makes it easy for you to access this hive. And it also has a feeder opening in the top, which if you're starting with a new colony, you'll probably be feeding them, but it's there if you don't need it, and it's there for when you do. And then there's a telescoping cover. Most basic one is wood. Now normally it's not just wood like this. You'll have a sheet metal top on that to protect it from the weather and keep the rain and everything like that off of it. So this is the most basic, but generally you don't buy just the deep box. If you do that, you're not prepared for your bees to expand. So you also want to I recommend getting a kit. If you're a beginner beekeeper, right now buying a kit is the best way to go because the kit might include your hive tool. It includes other supers already. Normally it would be a deep box and 2 medium supers, then the lid and everything. And I also want you to look at stands. Bee Smart Designs has hive stands that are lightweight and portable, but very rugged as far as their ability to support hundreds of pounds. So if you're looking for inexpensive, that doesn't mean it's not going to work. It certainly will. And the most basic is going to be a Langstroth style box. And today, Black Friday, everybody's running sales. And you'll be able to find something very inexpensively. So we're talking $350 to $400 for the whole setup. And that might even include a smoker. So that's the cheapest. That's what I would start with. And then later, if you decide beekeeping's for you, get a flow hive if that's what you want. Not everybody wants them, by the way. People just like Langstroth, and that's good, and they can stay with that. You have the 8 or 10 frame. And you go from there. Very inexpensive, and not a huge price difference, by the way, between having the 8 frame boxes and the 10 frame boxes. They just allow you to have more resources in there, more space for the bees, higher bee population. And although some people are saying that their 8 frame boxes are actually making it through winter better because they better imitate the interior space of a hollowed out old dead tree. So there's that. Now I have Elizabeth, and she says, I have recently moved to a new location and we have wild honeybees that are so strong they're robbing out my weaker colonies. I still haven't found it. All right. So Elizabeth is in a new location, and this practice does not change no matter where you are. She's in a new location, it's got wild bees coming after her bees and robbing them. Well, the level of robbing, but if they're really being robbed and they're being attacked by other honeybees, this answer is going to be too late. So this answer is for most of you that are starting off with a smaller colony. If you've got package bees, or you started off with a nucleus colony or something like that, the answers are always the same. You want a very small entrance reducer so that they can defend this opening. Even a small population of bees can defend a small opening on an entrance reducer. So that's number one. So those bees, 5,000 bees, whatever the population of the colony is, would be able to defend a small entrance, because the bees that come to rob your hive send out their scouts first, and the scouts test the landing board. They try to get in there. If they can't get past that entrance and they can't get out with nectar and whatever they're after, then they move on to something else. So it's the frenzy and the real robbing happens once they successfully get in. So if you've got a wide open landing board and a wide open entrance, and your colony strength is low, and those scouts do get in there, now when they come back, there's hundreds or thousands of them going in there, and you can't possibly defend it. And it's almost too late now to come in and all of a sudden now we're going to put in. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but to stop a robbing frenzy once it's started is very difficult. Very easy to prohibit in the first place with a properly sized entrance reducer. So let's say you walk out there with your cup of coffee and you look at your beehive and there's robbing going on right now. There's just a huge pile of bees tearing in there. You got to put your robbing screen on. Robbing screens are made out of a lot of different designs. This is the BeeSmart design version. It's a nice heavy plastic. It comes with its own pins, and in an emergency you can throw this right on an 8 frame or a 10 frame box. And you use these pins right here to pin it on, and then you make sure that your bees can get in and out through the top, and it shuts down the robbing in its place. Now you'll also have a huge pile of bees that are resident from that colony if you do this in the middle of the day, because that's when you notice the robbing. So when you put this on in the middle of the day, you're going to have thousands of your own bees kind of confused, clustered on the front, because they haven't figured out yet that the openings are now in the top. That's why if they're not actively robbing, you're just putting it on as a precaution. You want to put these on at nighttime when all your bees are in. So the following morning when your foragers go out, they are making their initial exit through the top here, and that way they know their way back in. Robbers want to fly straight in and straight out, and this is just another method. So look up robbing screens, they're called. Doesn't matter who makes them, and you can read reviews to see how effective they were. So the other thing that Elizabeth writes here is she still hasn't found it. So if you're actually trying to find out where the source of these feral bees are that are coming and attacking your apiary, that would be a good opportunity for you to get a book by Thomas Seeley called Finding the Wild Bees, and it shows you how to track them down. So if you're in a rural area and you know you don't have another apiary owned by someone else near you, and you're trying to find that wild bee tree, he describes a fantastic method for baiting, collecting bees, and then following them until you find that bee tree. Now the question is, what if you found them? What are you going to do with them? In my opinion, then nothing really changes. So you find your feral colony of bees and they're in a tree, then you want to leave them there. So we again go back to the original premise of making sure that the hives and colonies that you have under your control have entrance reducers that are properly sized for the colony's strength so that they can defend themselves against any enemies, wasps, bees, anything else. So it really doesn't change, but I recommend that book by Thomas Seeley if you want to learn how to track bees so you can be informed and find out where they are. The next one is from Martina Covey. Do you have problems with mice? And if so, how do you deal with this? I do not have problems with mice this year. I have had problems with mice in the past. And this is something that a lot of beekeeper meetings talk about this time of year, when they're, especially, in fact, before now, because with the first snowfalls, the mice are moving into beehives if they can get in. And I've had the advantage of putting cameras in all my hives this year, and I see them coming. So people use hardware cloth. The point is to put a grid on the entrance of your hive that your bees can go in and out of, including drones, but that a mouse could not go in and out of. Now, a mouse can get through a 1/2-inch opening. So here's an example of a galvanized sheet metal mouse guard. And what this does is this takes the place of your normal entrance reducer. So this goes off for winter, this goes in its place, and then they have these little shims here that mount to the front of your beehive, and then you can pull this up and down, and you can put a screw through here that holds it in place so a mouse can't just push it up. But this is very narrow, and a mouse can't get through it. And one of the reasons I like these is because you have to get out there and clean out the dead bees that are going to be blocking your entrances through winter. So if you have something that has a low entrance threshold like this that can prevent, in our area it's deer mice, if you want to keep those out, then this does it, but you also have the opportunity to sweep out dead bees under it. If you've got hardware cloth, you actually have to remove the hardware cloth, then sweep out the dead bees, and then put it back. So due to the lack of convenience there, I think a lot of people don't clean out the bees as often as they would if they had access through something like this. So it's metal, they can't chew it, and we go back to this robbing screen that I showed you before. This also has pins that can go on the bottom of it, which elevate it, and this opening size is the same as this opening size here, only now it's plastic, and the mice again can't squeeze under here, but the bees can come and go. So that's an advantage that you have for that. So this can be used in the wintertime as a mouse guard, and in the summertime or times of dearth when you're trying to fight off all those robbers. So this is kind of a multi-purpose tool, and this is a very specific, it's definitely designed as a mouse guard, galvanized metal. So then let's say we have a mouse problem and they're already in, and let's say I've seen them going in the entrance and coming out, or you look at your beehive entrances and there's grass and everything in there. Got to get that out of there. Mice are going to mess up your beehive. They'll chew your frames, and they'll defecate inside your hive, and they'll urinate in there too. And we don't even want to talk about hantavirus, which is something, there were 9 cases of hantavirus in the state of Pennsylvania. In our southwestern states, southern states, those instances are even higher. It's a respiratory illness that happens when you interact with the dry waste material of deer mice, and it's something you definitely don't want in your hive. So then another method, this is the very end. This is the mice are doing what they want, you can't stop them, and now you have to go to lethal force. So some people don't want to do this, but I've done it in the past and I rethought it this year. These are Victor mouse traps. It's a regular snap trap. So this actually works because these are my favorite types. The Victor trap with the little paddle on it. It also has some kind of scent on it. It's got these little holes in it so that the mice will want to chew on it. You don't want them to just lick it because they won't set it off. But here's the thing. I used to put peanut butter on these and then set these on my landing boards in my hives, but then I thought, how do I know that was the mouse that was going in and out of the hive? If I've put peanut butter on it, aren't I attracting them now? So we don't bait them at all. So if you've got a hive where you see, maybe you don't have security cameras, so you don't have the advantage I have, but if I see a mouse actively working on that entrance and trying to chew it, and especially when it comes to the wooden entrance reducers, mice will chew them open enough so they can get in. And it is amazing how small the hole is that they can get through. So what I do is, these have sensitivity settings on them. So when you put the kill bar over here and you move it over here to the left side, that's a strong setting. And you move it over here to the right side over here, that's a sensitive setting. That means it's going to trigger easily. So what I do is, I just set these up, put it on the sensitive side, set the mouse trap up like this, but remember this is a model, this is not the full-size one, but then guess what? I set it right here, and in a full-size beehive, the entrance would be here, And the bees can fly in and out. They're not going to trigger it. But when your friend the mouse comes over and he lands on that, it's going to get the mouse. So you didn't bait him in. You're going to get the mouse that's already trying to set up residence in there, or the one that's doing the chewing and the damage. So you can actually put these on the landing board. I also have another video where I show the what I call my box of certain death, which are mouse trap boxes that are, you just create a channel out of wood and the mouse traps are set inside and it's got a hole at either end and the mice naturally go through it. And then you snap those and it keeps the mouse away from, if you've got chickens, chickens eat mice. So it keeps your dog from eating them. So it keeps them away from pets and stuff too. So there are other methods of trapping them, but that's your last resort. First resort, prevent them from getting in the first place. If you've got tenacious mice that are not paying attention or respecting your space, now you have to go to lethal force. And then I recommend you wear surgical gloves and bag up those mice and do not come in contact with their waste material. Very potentially dangerous. So that's what I do. Jay Klin, I'm working on my local city council, it's a rural community, and to amend the city code to allow hobby beekeeping. Currently, bees are classified as a farm animal. How that ever happened, I can't imagine. And farm animals aren't allowed in town. So here's the thing. Well, I can tell you how that happened. Beekeeping and bees are under the Department of Agriculture because it deals with our agriculture. And here's a curious thing that a lot of you may not know. Who are some of the first people that asked for there to be a Department of Agriculture so that people wouldn't be spinning their wheels all over the country, so that we would all benefit from collective knowledge and practices that would make farming and agriculture better? Lorenzo Langstroth is the inventor of the Langstroth hive, and he was one of the people that was writing letters saying we need actually a government department that would oversee agriculture. So because bees are, what's the biggest job for bees in agriculture? It's pollination. So they do fall under the Department of Agriculture, and in the state of Pennsylvania where I live, you actually have to register your backyard apiary with the Department of Agriculture so they know that you're there and that you're maintaining hives. And you have the potential, of course, to be inspected. But the whole point of that was so that we would have collective knowledge and people wouldn't be trying to improve something that's already been solved in another part of the country. So through a Department of Agriculture, we're normalizing our practices. So that's how that got started. But a lot of towns and communities want to have little lots and green spaces where they're going to keep beehives in them. And in our current city, the city adjacent to me, they've had issues in the past where they had to go and try to get permission and permits to have beehives on a lot. So one of the things, they continued in this comment here that there's a lot of fear presented about swarms, etc., and daycare kids. And this person is asking for ideas to make their case when they talk to those who are making decisions about regulation and ordinances and things like that. So this, for me, is kind of a gray area. I know that we want to be able to keep bees in town, and we also want to be able to do that responsibly. Because let's everybody has cute little cartoons about honeybees and they're all fuzzy, and we like to focus on the fact that they get honey and that they pollinate the flowers and everything else, but we're also talking about a venomous insect. We're talking about a venomous insect that's social, that lives in a hive that could have thousands, up to 100,000 bees in there. So this comes under responsible management too. So I could actually, in some kind of public forum like that, I could very easily take the side of the daycare owners and discuss the risks to those kids. So physically, how far away is that colony going to be? And who's managing it? And what are the management restrictions? How many colonies are you allowed to have? Well, how many colonies does it take for one of those to go hot one day and actually go out and start stinging people? So some of the validating points that would need to be made when you're talking about where to put your beehives would be, how much space is on the lot? How big would the yard have to be for you to get a permit like that? And where on that property line would your beehives be? And would they have to be surrounded by a stockade fence, for example? I personally would mandate in a setting like that, where people might have a quarter-acre plot, that you would have to have a stockade fence around your bees so they fly up and over and they aren't flying directly through your neighbors. And one of the reasons for me, a lot of people just want to green light everything to deal with bees, but remember, we're dealing with people. And not everyone likes to follow the rules. Not everyone is responsible. And I can't even begin to detail out what kind of restrictions we might put on somebody that's keeping bees like that. So what I would encourage for this writer is that you find the cases that have already been settled where ordinances are already in place and were accepted, and find out the details of those ordinances and what the restrictions put upon the beekeepers were and what the logic behind those restrictions was. If I had a daycare right across the street from someone and they were going to put in 6 beehives in their backyard, and they're 50 or 60 feet from where the children play at the daycare, I would say that's reasonable cause for concern, possibly. So we have to think about proximity of everything, population density. Some people in high-rise buildings in New York City are keeping beehives on their balconies and decks, and there's rooftop beehives being kept. There are rooftop beehives in Washington, D.C., where there are no skyscrapers, and they're doing very well. But see, if it's on a rooftop, look at the flyaway of the bees. They're not going to interact with people that way. So some people who are afraid of stinging insects, and they are venomous insects, they've seen movies like this maybe, The Deadly Bees, and this can cause an irrational fear of bees. And people that are afraid, what do? They swat at them, they run from them. Little boys are naughty, they pick on the bees, they throw them on each other. People get stung indirectly, and it's not the bee's fault. But guess whose fault it all of a sudden becomes? Is whoever owns the bees in the area gets blamed for all the bee activity. Good or bad, it tends to be what happens. So in order to make a successful argument, when you're trying to enact those regulations and so on, so that you can allow people, if you're trying to green light it, find out where those arguments have been heard before, how successful they are, and read their ordinances. Most of those ordinances are available for public viewing. So you can even go online, go to some township that's got that, read what the ordinance is, and see how successful it was. Often when these decisions are made, they have these township meetings and town hall meetings, and people get together, and if you have really articulate people that are very much against keeping bees there, and no one shows up on behalf of the beekeepers that has experience, that can articulate properly what the real risks are, and you have to justify that kind of with what are the benefits of these people being able to keep those bees there. So we need experienced beekeepers to show up on behalf of the person that's trying to get that passed, so that when there are arguments against, you can have rational discussion about why those arguments may not be justified and why you might want to greenlight that. So there are community gardens in some larger cities where they have a 10-foot chain link fence around them, and they'll actually have an apiary in the middle of that garden, but usually it's an empty lot. So it's a half-acre lot in the city somewhere, which otherwise would have been a vacant lot, so it's part of the gardening plans where they're greening these spaces and they want to use that for community gardens. Not every gardener wants to work right next to a bunch of beehives too. So not everyone that's growing fruits and vegetables, even though we know that they need the pollination, they don't necessarily want to interact with bees. So it's about educating the public. So there's no real simple answer, but we need to be realistic about what the threats are. So you could go at it from a statistical end. How many people are stung by bees? How many people in the area are normally allergic to bees? How many people with allergies end up in the hospital? Now you get hospital statistics and find out what's going on. Would you increase those risks by adding a beehive right there? Are there currently bees in the area? Would you rather be stung by a bee or a wasp or a hornet? Because if there's already stinging insects in the area, are honeybees better? There are a lot of ways to look at it, but statistics are going to be the strength. Safety, environmental health and safety is going to be part of it too. And that has to all balance out. So I personally would prepare myself by looking at where ordinances have already been passed and how they made it, what the arguments, and just be prepared. So next we have Francis Jones. They don't like black apparently, so I'm surprised they don't mind black acorn frames. By the way, I have some questions about color. Now, Francis is talking about black frames and how bees don't like black. For example, if you get into your beehives, and I like to wear nitrile gloves, and unfortunately I don't have any right here right now, but mine are white or slightly off-white, and the bees don't care. And that would not stop a bee sting at all. They could sting right through those gloves, but because they're white, they don't pay any attention. Some people get these black mechanics nitrile gloves, and they go into the beehives with those and receive stings on your hands. So bees definitely pay attention to the color of things, and they react differently to different colors. So if you had black gloves on instead of white or off-white gloves, the bees are going to pay more attention to those and potentially sting them. But this question is interesting because they don't like black apparently, so I'm surprised that they don't mind black acorn frames. So what's an acorn frame? Well, that's a one-piece frame that's heavily waxed that the bees use to draw it out. Where does this frame exist? This frame is on the inside of a beehive. What is inside a beehive? Darkness. So the bees inside the beehive aren't seeing this as black. They're just physically feeling their way around. The communication that goes on inside a beehive is sensory, so without the sense of sight. So they are vibrating in there, they're smelling each other in there, they have their antennae out and they're touching each other and they're moving around. So the communication is very tactile, so they don't care if this is black or white. So this, why is it black? That's for the beekeeper. If you've ever looked for freshly laid eggs by the queen, if you have black cell bottoms, then you spot those tiny, tiny cells easily. So you see those eggs and you see them right away. If this is white, you have to really shine a light in there and hope that it's a raking light that you can spot them. But I use black acorn. They're available in black or white, it doesn't matter. But I use black because it helps me spot things better. So it provides a visual contrast so that I can look at that. Bees don't care. It's inside and they're in the dark anyway. Most of what bees do inside their colony, inside the hive, is in the dark. So this leads on to other questions. So that's a no starter as far as the color of the frames that we're using. It's a benefit to the beekeeper. Bees don't care. So I have questions about color. If bees don't see red, why aren't bee suits red? And if bees prefer blue and purple, why are bee suits white? Is there a red LED torch you can recommend? So we'll take this case by case. Okay. So why aren't bee suits red? Well, the point of the bee suit is not for the bee not to be able to see you. The point of the bee suit is to kill contrast. Bees go after contrasting things. Now, me personally, if you've watched my other videos, I don't stick to the rule of your bee suit has to be white. I have a camouflage bee suit. There are pink camo bee suits. There are blue camo bee suits. And guess what? My bees don't care one bit. They do pay attention to black though. So I would not wear a black bee suit. Because you know what else they go after? We had this discussion in my beekeeping group. They go after the black screen on your veil. Now the black screen on the veil is designed so when you're look through it, it's cutting down on glare. But if the veil were white, you would have fewer bees trying to get at your veil. I've been working with the bees before and had, you know, the little guard bees really hit the veil and rev up their little motor, and you can tell they're trying to deliver a sting really hard, and then they eventually give up and move on. So I don't see that as a problem. But if veils were white, the bees would have less interest in it because it's less contrasting and it certainly isn't black. So if you go out there with a solid black anything, it's going to get their attention first. When I've done research on insects that are highly defensive, we're talking hornets and wasps now too, and when I did the Africanized bee checkout, they went after my camera. The whole thing was black. It had the little windsock on it, that was black. They nailed that camera. If that camera were a living thing, it wouldn't have been living for very long because they targeted the black for sure. So this is why, if they prefer blue and purple, these are colors that they distinguish. Now, when a bee sees red, what does it see it as? It sees red as black. So it's not that they can't see it at all. I mean, if you painted a beehive red, does that mean the bee can't find the beehive? It looks like nothing's there at all? No, it sees it as a dark color. So they see it. They just see it as black. They don't see it as red. So if you're a biologist and you're evaluating, you know, the eyes of the bee, the compound eyes of the bee, and you're looking at what those eyes react to when it comes to different color spectrums, the eyes of the bee will react to red the same as it reacts when it sees black. So that's how they determine what they perceive as far as colors go anyway. So do they see red? Yeah. So the next thing is, If bees prefer blue and purple, why are bee suits white? That's why. Low contrast. Is there a red LED head torch you recommend? I don't have a head torch, are the ones that you wear on your head. I don't have one that's red. So we have handheld ones. Here's a red one. I don't know if it shows up as red there. But the problem is, Francis says that the head torch, now that's in use, the bees see it, go right after it. Well, every red flashlight that I've had, and red pointers and everything else, if I point them inside a observation hive through the glass in a corner somewhere, little guard bees converge on it. So they definitely see it, they definitely sense it. So a red light is not invisible to the bees. A red light they definitely see. Now, compare that to a white light, they definitely go after if you turn a red light on and a white light, they're going to converge on that white light right away if you're out there at night. The red lights are much reduced response, and you want to get a flashlight that you can control that on. But what I would look for, if you already have the headgear like the mountaineers wear and stuff, I've got one that looks ridiculous. It has like 6 lights all over it, and you control how much light it puts out, and it's got a huge pack on the back. If you want to change that spectrum to a red spectrum, then look into the red filters that you put on them, and they're sold through photography outlets, for example. But a lot of hunters use them too, so hunting supply websites would be offering you flashlights that are red and that have filters that are removable. So I would look at that. When I used to go out and look for things at night, I took bread wrappers that had amber colors in the plastic, and I was putting the bread wrappers over the fronts with rubber bands over the fronts of my lights. So you can find something that's already translucent, and because they're LEDs, they shouldn't get super hot, so you don't have to worry about them melting the plastic. But you can find things that are translucent that already tint to an amber or a red and put that on there with just rubber bands for now. But I don't know of one that's sold and marketed already, because the point is for them to see very well. But when it comes to hunters, they're the ones that are sneaking up on game at night, and they are using red spectrum lighting a lot. So I would look at the hunting websites if I find one for you, but it won't be a recommendation based on my personal experience. It'll just be one that I found that seemed like the reviews were good, and that would be down in the video description. So also a lot of people are recently asking when I'm going to put out t-shirts and stuff with the bee design, the way to bee design that's on the coffee cup. If you look at this video and you look at the little row of merchandise that's being sold down underneath, there already are a complete list of hoodies, t-shirts, coffee cups, and different colored coffee cups. And then where the coffee cup that you're seeing right now has a little white rectangle on it, the new ones do not. It's the bee image itself on there, so it's overlaying a bunch of different colors. So I've expanded all of that. YouTube holds on to that, and they have to clear it first. So they have to make sure terminology is acceptable, and that you're marketing stuff that isn't offensive and all that stuff. So those t-shirts are there. So if you go to the bottom of underneath the video here and you click on any of those coffee cups, it takes you to the Teespring listing, and you can see all the designs that are out. So yes, for those of you that are asking about those t-shirts and you're anxious, and they're on sale right now. So if you buy any of that merchandise and you put holiday, all caps, HOLIDAY 20, and you put that in the code at checkout, you get 20% off until the 4th of December. So there's a lot of designs. They're just waiting for YouTube to approve them, and I guess it must be backed up because it's taken a long time. There's another thing I wanted to talk about. Now this guy's name, I think it's Urkel65, because it's ERRCL65, a way to reliquefy honey without ruining it. Now here's the funny thing about honey. First of all, it's not always liquid. Oh look, I just happen to have a jar of honey here. This honey was harvested this year, and it is liquid honey. Now, one of the things that happens too, some honey gets crystallized. So now this is like creamed honey. You could take the lid off of this stuff. It's not pouring, it's not going anywhere. It's solidified in the jar. Is this stuff ruined? No, it's still good to go. In fact, A lot of people like this honey and they just scoop it out with their spoon. So, but what if you wanted this honey to go back into a liquid state and look like this? You do have to be very careful because it is sensitive to heat. You can heat up your honey and ruin it. So how hot do you have to get this to get it to look like this again? And will that happen? Yes, it will. You can take a nice big pot, fill that with water, put that on your stove, and make sure you can really regulate the temperature, because you want this to be around 120 to 125 degrees. Don't go much higher than that. If you hit 140 to 150, you've ruined it. Even the bees won't touch it when you superheat, because changes happen to the sugar and it's not good. So if you hover around 120 and 125 degrees, and it's going to take a while, you can leave this in there. It might take, an hour, 2 hours at 120 for this all to liquefy again. And why does it do that in the first place? Sometimes this has to do with the floral resource that they were using. So if these are asters and goldenrod, asters crystallize. Now what can you do with this honey? I mean, like me, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with it. This honey, everybody fusses about emergency feeding their bees. You can feed your bees honey, but who wants to do that? But this year I have a surplus. I have lots of honey. So guess what I'm going to do with these solidified chunks of honey? This, instead of fondant, instead of sugar, instead of putting dry sugar in there, I'm going to take that Wrap It Around feeder and I'm going to scoop out big chunks of this, and that's what's going to be in the Wrap It Around feeder. Get that real quick. This is the Wrap It Around feeder. This goes on my feeder shims. In the wintertime, you take the center off because we're going to dry feed. Liquid feed is gone. I'm going to take huge heaping spoonfuls of this stuff out and I'm going to put it around in here. And then on days when the bees can break cluster and get up through here, the lid will be on so they can't wander all through the feeder shim. Guess what they're going to eat? Solidified honey. What's the advantage? Why don't I just pour a bunch of this in there? I don't know if you've ever seen what happens to bees when you have a bunch of honey in an open space. That is nothing but a tar pit. They all die. You'll have thousands of dead bees if you have honey pooled in one of these. They just get into it, they can't get out, they die. Now, so if you've got crystallized honey like this, you've got a food resource that they made themselves. And so you can scoop that out, put this in here, and now you've got the maximum quality feed you can give them. So if you're a backyard beekeeper, you're not in it for commercial purposes, you don't need to yield an income from it, you can wait to see this is the good stuff, so that's what you're going to consume or sell to your friends or whatever you're going to do to reclaim some of your expense. But if you've got jars that turn solid like this, why not just feed that back to your bees? And if you've got a Flow Hive 2 or something like that, you can take this jar, the really solid stuff. I mean, if you tip it and it starts to move a little bit, like applesauce, that's not good enough yet. This stuff is firm like a face cream. You could put this right on top of your inner cover over the feeder hole and leave it just like that, and the bees can go up there and eat it. This will not expand and contract with the weather, but when spring and summer comes along, you got to get it off of there, because what happens when the top part of your hive that is not ventilated or controlled by the bees gets hot? This stuff will re-liquefy and drip down into the hive, and you don't want that. But as a winter feed in the north, this stuff is awesome for your bees. So feed that to your bees for your emergency feed if they've gone through. If don't play with fondant and all the other stuff that everybody's talking about. If you have crystallized honey, you just found your emergency feed source, and it's stable, and it's antibacterial, and it's good for the bees. And it's way better than any sugar you could put in there. So those are my thoughts on that. So yeah, if you want to reliquefy it, put it in a big thing of water, keep it at 120 to 125 until it reliquefies, and then use it, and you're good to go. But there's nothing wrong with eating it just like this too. You can scoop that out, put it right in your tea, whatever. It remelts when you spread it on hot toast and everything else, so some people just love it that way. So that's it, emergency feed. And oh yeah, Jill King wanted me to remind everyone, Also on today, which is Black Friday, Flow Hive is running specials. So theirs is $150 off, so you can get the Flow kit. That's the hive, that's a bee suit, that's a smoker, that's a hive tool. So if you're looking to spend the big bucks this Christmas for somebody, today's the day. They have $150 off, and I think they also give you a $100 coupon. So if you've got a friend that's also interested in buying the Flow Hive, you have them use that coupon too. So you guys can be way ahead. So I'll put a link to that down in the video description too. And I want to thank those of you who wrote in, and I appreciate the chat. So if you showed up today, thank you for being here. If you have questions, write them in the comment section down below, and we'll do our best to get back here and talk to you again on Friday. And thank you to those of you who showed up for the live chats. That was a lot of fun. Those are impromptu, very easy to do, and I look forward to doing more live chats in the future. Thanks for watching. Have fun shopping this weekend.